Welcome back to Sports Radio 810 WHB's pre-race coverage of the STP 400. You're with the RacinBoys, and joining us is Lee Spencer from FoxSports.com, getting ready for a big day of racing. And Lee, how's everything in Kansas for you? Welcome.
Everything's awesome here. Always love to come back to Missouri, my home state, and, across the river as it would be.
Missouri? You're a Missouri girl?
I'm a St. Louis girl.
Really?
Absolutely.
You're on the wrong side of the state, but God bless you from Missouri anyway, right? Missouri, Kansas City, that St. Louis thing, it's still going.
We all dig the ribs, don't we?
Yes. So now, were you around when the Royals beat the Cardinals, I guess, in '85?
I was, and I still have those visions of Andy Harb, having his breakdown. But then again, if you guys ever want to come to Busch Stadium and visit, take a look at those 11 pennants up there. And
see, they always come back to that, right?
Yeah,
see, I grew up a Cardinal fan, then I became a Royals fan, and
wow.
That's been pretty tough. But that's another story.
How do you ever leave being a Cardinal fan? I mean,
Well, when I became a Royals fan, the Royals were good and the Cardinals were not so good. That was like the mid '70s. And then when the two played each other in the World Series, see, up until that time, I could root for both teams because they didn't play each other.
Right.
Then the first time I ever rooted against the Cardinals was Game 7 of the World Series. And since that time, when Whitey left in '90, it all fell apart.
The I-70 series.
Oh, yeah. Was there some counseling after that, Kurt?
No, but I still have a hard time dealing with that. But anyway, back to racing.
Back to racing here at the great state of Kansas, which is our neighbor here in Missouri. First, surprised at qualifying, anything stand out? A Dinger gets the pole. I don't think a lot of people are surprised by that. We know that he really gets up on the wheel, drives hard. He's with an established team that has a history of having success with the 22 car. No surprises?
Well, you have to remember, Kurt Busch won the pole for this race last year, although it wasn't, this month. He did win the pole, so they do have some great notes. Look how strong Brad Keselowski ran here last year. I think that they really had their act together. And AJ, nobody pushes himself as AJ. And, it's just he's so determined to make this work. He came from home. We were talking a little bit about that before the break. He comes from such humble beginnings, and what he's been able to do coming up through open wheel and just waiting for that opportunity and, not waiting, sitting idle, waiting, improving every year he's been on the circuit. If you look at his results, and you kind of have to dismiss those first 2 years with Red Bull because that was a situation where Red Bull was just getting up to speed. Right. This was a brand new organization with brand new people. He had a crew chief who had never even been a crew chief at the Cup level.
A lot of growing pains.
Absolutely. You're putting a guy like that with a kid who's, never raced stock cars. I mean, that was just absolutely insane. So, he starts to get into situations that are a little more stable. And I won't say a lot more stable because we've all, chronicled the RPM situation over the last few years. And then last year in the off season, he hears, through the grapevine that, he's getting booted from the organization. Nobody even tells him. I think you read it on Twitter or somebody called him or something.
Sad, right?
And this is going on at a time where AJ has walked into the RPM building. He's delivering Christmas presents for his entire crew. And he's like, what's this I hear that you guys are looking to replace me? His best season and came one position short of making the chase last fall. And he missed races. Brian Vickers missed races with Red Bull.
Right.
But you look at the progression, and I think what Roger Penske saw in this young kid, other than the fact that he comes from an open wheel background, which Roger can relate to, every year AJ has made strong progress, and it's not a 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You can kind of watch the scale just go up, and he's finally in a situation which is absolutely stable, other than the fact that they're going back to Ford, which he's already has a really good relationship with the people at Ford, so that'll be great for AJ. But he's finally in a situation where he can build a foundation and just continue to show progress.
Aside the open wheel connection, and obviously probably that was attractive to Red Bull because of their Formula One program that they wanted to kind of go with the open wheel guy, Scott Speed, speaking of him as well. And I asked Marty Smith this question. Was it a surprise to the national media that stays out here all the time? Was it a surprise that he was hired by Penske? I mean, obviously the open wheel connection, we get that. But aside from that, were you surprised that he was the pick? Because there was some pretty good drivers still available, Vickers being one of those guys. And maybe Vickers hurt his reputation a little bit at the end of the last year, his actions out on the racetrack. But were you surprised by that hire?
Not really, because I kind of had, had information coming from the backside.
Sure,
and
right.
I broke that story
Right,
about AJ going to Penske while I was in Hawaii on vacation.
Wow.
And so it was like between that and the Finch story with Kurt Busch, I kind of had my finger on what was going on with both deals. But, Roger likes drivers where there's blue sky ahead. And once you get into that organization, we've seen how loyal he is because, he's given Sam Hornish
Tremendous loyalty.
Absolutely. The type of patience that he's shown with Sam, because Sam really delivered for him in Indy cars. And, Sam delivered for him in the Nationwide Series with his very first NASCAR career win at Phoenix. And, Sam just needed seat time. There's certain ways that you go about putting together programs, and, certainly if anybody knows how to do it, it's Roger Penske. And I think he saw something in AJ. He saw his potential, he saw his drive, and he saw his commitment. And you won't find another guy out in the garage who works any harder, I will say, than AJ, because he's got a lot to prove.
Well, he seems like such a natural fit for Penske Racing. Now they can just get figured out the fuel mileage problems they've been having over the last several weeks.
But it's not a mileage problem. They're experimenting with that system inside the tank, and they're trying to – I don't know if they're trying to get better mileage or try to get every drop of fuel. Do you know what they're trying to accomplish there in that area?
I just know that there's a pickup issue. I was told by people within the program that there is a fuel pickup issue. So it's the delivering the fuel, and nobody wants to say anything adverse about fuel injection because we finally got up to speed with fuel injection.
Right.
They've only been using it on production cars for how many years? So here we are, and I think you're right. I think they're looking for a competitive advantage. But then again, they've had issues with the entire process since we were testing at Daytona in January. So I'm kind of surprised with their background, given that they're an open wheel team, that it has taken as long as it has for them to get the kinks out of this.
That's always been a big deal for Penske, though. You go back to the Ryan Newman days. He won a large portion of those races by running, I think they run an 830 carburetor, and they were trying to run a 750 just to get that little bit of mileage advantage, maybe give up a little bit on the horsepower. So this is something they've always been conscious about. And I know most teams are, but it seems like Penske stands out a little more than others.
Absolutely, because they are a performance company. Across the board, so
right.
that part of it makes sense.
Well, let's talk about who is running up at the front right now, namely Greg Biffle, coming off that big win at Texas last weekend. He's leading the points right now. He's been very good at this racetrack with 2 wins. Talk about Greg Biffle and just how well he is running. He is championship caliber material. We know that back in 2005 when he almost pulled it off, but he's really got it going good now, doesn't he?
Matt Pusha is his lucky charm. If you want to look at a situation that has gone through a complete transformation, it would be that team, because Pusha came in, midway last season. Greg Irwin had been there for a long, long time, but, Pusha was bound and determined to make this deal work. Of all the sponsors over at Roush Fenway Racing, and sponsorship has been a problem for that organization, 3M stepped up to the plate. They had that announcement last year at Talladega in the spring. They re-upped while we went through the whole Carl Edwards drama. Okay, right. Carl, when are you going to sign your contract? And
right.
That got old and tired really quick. Here was 3M stepping up. Here was Greg Biffle stepping up. And, Matt Pusha came on board not long after that. At the end of the season, Matt Pusha cleaned house. He brought in all of his own people, picked out his own pit crew. Everything, if something should go wrong, it will be on Matt Pusha's shoulders. On the other side of that equation, everything that goes right can be attributed to Matt Pusha and what he's been able to do in a short period of time, making the number 16 team his own. And, Biffle's not getting any younger. He's one of the 40-plus drivers out there. He's also the only driver in NASCAR to have championships in both the Truck Series and the Nationwide Series. And, for years we've been asking Greg, what would it mean to get that triple crown? Mm-hmm. Nobody in NASCAR has ever accomplished that feat. Greg Biffle is the first, and quite frankly, at this point, the way they've changed the point system, he's possibly the only person, until Austin Dillon gets up to speed. Right. And, of course, he'd have to win his nationwide championship to be the guy, he would probably be the next in line that could accomplish that.
Lee Spencer joined us on the pre-race show. Let me ask you this. The comments yesterday by Biffle, or maybe I should say the lack of comment, when asked if he felt that he was the number one driver now that he's leading the points, and he said, no, the 99 is the number one car. I like to play the underdog. Is there still internally, is there still a little animosity towards what happened last year? I would say there's a
lot of animosity.
Yeah.
And I will say a lot of that stems from the negotiating that went down on Carl Edwards' behalf. And at some point, the whole story will come out as far as what went on over there. Carl Edwards was very close to being a Joe Gibbs Racing driver. Very close. Sponsorship fell apart at the last minute, and, that kind of changed how things went. From what I understand, sponsorship fell apart right around the time of Indianapolis. So, even then it was late in the season, because I think Ricky Stenhouse Jr. could have stepped up. I really think that he's at a point now that
he's ready.
He's ready for that, to take that next step. Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, I think he's one of the few guys who's ready to take that next step, because right now, Sprint Cup is so competitive. Look at Joey Logano. We kept hearing sliced toast, or sliced bread, and until this year, he's looked like toast. So that's where I'm. But the thing of it is, you have to have maturity. You have to have desire, and it's not just basic desire. Oh yeah, I want to grow up and be a Sprint Cup guy. Mm-hmm. Jack gave Ricky Stenhouse a real lesson in humility when he made him go back and work on those cars, and it taught him a very valuable lesson, because quite frankly, some of the, if I can say, candy asses that come into this sport, they've never gotten their hands dirty. Daddy's hired all the right people to take care of the cars, and then what can they tell you when push comes to shove? Well, heck, if some of these owners, and certainly sponsorship has a lot to do with it, because the sponsor commitments today are more than they've ever been, because you got to get more bang from your buck at every level of support. But that being said, if you're the guy wrecking the car, shouldn't you be, shoulder to shoulder with your fabricators, putting that car back together? I mean, you've been in the business. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You can't have this feeling of superiority that I'm just the guy that shows up on the weekends, And the one thing I've told drivers when they're getting into the sport, you've got to go back on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, whatever. You got to go visit your guys at the shop. You got to take them to lunch. You got to take them to dinner when you're out on the road. Let them know you're part of a unit. Right. It's not you and, I want to thank the guys back at the shop. Those guys back at the shop get you to the racetrack. Those guys back at the shop are the difference between you finishing first and 43rd on a weekly basis. And I think Stenhouse had it, he learned a great appreciation for that, when he and Jack a couple years ago just tried to put it all together. Right. And he rewarded Jack with a championship. And so, getting back to the whole Carl situation, given what, Jack and Ford anteed up to get him to stay in the 99 car, I think that there are a lot of hurt feelings over there. There's a lot of egos involved. You've got a lot of, Matt Kenseth, he delivered Jack his first, his second championship. You also have a situation where you look at who was winning, and Carl won one race last year. Had he just won another race, it wouldn't have come down to Homestead. It would have been over.
So is the lingering effects of Carl not having won a race for a long time, as you mentioned, more so with the lingering contract negotiations or the fact that he fell just short from winning the championship? What's had an impact more on the fact that Carl is not running to expectations?
Oh, boy. I asked him at Texas, I guess it was last week, because the thing of it was everybody went into Texas expecting a Roush car to win. Particularly Carl, giving his background at that track and how solid he's been there. When Tony came in and won, it kind of had to take some of the wind out of Carl's sails, whether he wants to admit it or not, and he'd never admit it because he's too proud to admit it. Compared to Denny Hamlin when, in 2010, when we got out of Phoenix, Hamlin was done.
Yeah.
I mean,
his emotion showed.
Oh, he was completely dejected. Carl's much brighter than Denny and can put on a much better face than Denny can. And but still, you leave Texas without that trophy, and Tony just kind of reaches out and grabs it.
Right.
You just kind of have to ask, was that the pivotal moment in the championship?
I've known Carl for about 14 years. And he drove for me one time, won a race out at I-70 Speedway. And you're right. He's really bright. I don't think people really get. I mean, they see that he's really sharp and everything, but I don't think really they understand how marketing-minded he is and how he creates those opportunities. And maybe there's some jealousy on Greg Biffle's part because of Carl being able to attract these sponsors because of his personality. I think that might have a little bit to do with it. But I will tell you one thing about Carl. He is, I don't know, you know as well as anybody, he is so driven to prove to everybody that he is the best in the sport. But at the same time last year, and I don't know if this is a yes or no answer to this question or not, but I believe, and Carl told me that this is not the case, but I believe that Tony was in his head at the end. When he started talking that little smack, Carl tried to sling it back a little bit and say, it's not bothering me. But I sensed that it was in Carl's head a little bit. Did you?
I did too, because quite frankly, there's no way that's not going to get to you a little bit when you're playing a high-stakes game like those two were. Mm-hmm. And Tony, Carl may be smarter than Tony. Tony's the best poker player out there. Tony, I mean, on and off the track, on the poker table, I mean, I'd put my money with Tony at Vegas. That's just, that's his MO.
Right.
And if there's somebody who, could wear the Intimidator's robe when it comes to playing the mind games, it's all, Carl can try. Carl is very savvy on a whole different level. And Carl does have a mean streak like Tony does, but
he does.
But you're not gonna see it like that. Tony doesn't give a damn about his image. Carl's all about image, and I expect to get a call from somebody one day saying he's running for state senate and then he's going to run for Congress, and just kind of, he's got much bigger, he's a much bigger picture. He's got much bigger aspirations than simply racing.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
And I think that we'll see that somewhere down the line. So everything Carl does, you have to take it with, just a vision into what Carl wants to do when Carl grows up. Mm-hmm. And, he's got the perfect little family now. He lives in the perfect little town.
Right.
All the pieces are there for something.
He's putting them in place.
Yeah, something much. He's got, like I said, much bigger aspirations than simply driving a race car.
Yeah.
Well, let's go across the border, back over here to Kansas, and talk about our other local driver, Clint Boyer. New life for him with Michael Waltrip Racing, and things seem to be going really well for Clint right now. He's up there battling for a chase spot right now. How do you see how Clint has adjusted over at Michael Waltrip?
Clint can go any place, anytime, and become your best friend. Clint is the guy, and why sponsors just don't knock down the door. And I was so happy to see that 5 Hour Energy picked up all the races, because there's no one in the garage more so than Clint that you want to hang out and have a beer with that you want to say, Clint, take me down with you to Lake of the Ozarks because I know it'll be a weekend I never forget.
Bring some aspirin.
Well, you'll need that Monday morning.
Yeah,
but,
right.
You know, Clint doesn't have to fake it. Carl has to fake his personality. And what you see with Clint is what you get. And Clint's a lot like AJ from the standpoint of he is so grateful for this opportunity. You know, Clint worked in the tire shop. You know that all too well. I said to Clint, you know, we had this conversation at the Royal Stadium on Friday night. I said, Clint, you know, it's really funny watching you because you're doing stuff now that you have a big gaping hole in your development as a child, things that you didn't get to do on weekends that the rest of us did. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he said, no, I didn't go to the proms. I didn't go to the dances. I didn't get to do this or that. And, you know, I said, you follow the Royals? Well, I followed the Chiefs a little bit because, you know, that's when racing season was over. And I said, you know, and you know, I said, when I grew up in St. Louis, you know, we used to go to Lake of the Ozarks on the weekends from time to time. Is that one of the reasons you bought a house down there? He goes, we were so poor, there's no way I could afford to have a house down there. He goes, I was lucky when when I had friends who had places down there would invite us along. He's so grateful for what he has from that standpoint. You know, from the racing side of it, we all expected Martin Truex Jr. to really step it up because it's a contract year for him, for Napa. And, you know, given the lack of top quality rides right now, because, you know, there's probably 25 teams that are pretty darn equal. And, you know, Waltrip was one of those mid-level teams. Well, not right now. You know, they're right up there with the best of it, as you could see by where everybody qualified. But that being said, we thought Clint would end up pushing Truex. I think Truex and Mark Martin are kind of pushing Clint right now because he's the one that really has to get up to speed with them. And you know, he's going through a situation. Mark Martin knows the sport back and forth, knows the cars back and forth. Mark Martin, you can plug him into any situation. He's going to be fine. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a few growing pains with Clint and Brian Patty. Brian's really methodical. He had 3 miserable years with Juan Pablo Montoya, who, you know, if you want the honest truth, is a bit of a prima donna. Really doesn't, you know, he needs racing to define him as a man because he comes from a very comfortable background. His wife has a very comfortable background. So this is kind of like his golf game. I mean, you know, this is where he comes to play more so than most of the drivers in here. I'm a race car driver. Well, you know, that's kind of his MO because that's what he has to do. That's not taking away from anything from his talent. If Juan Pablo Montoya was hungrier, he'd probably still be in Formula One.
You know, you said a couple things that I've just not heard a lot of national media say, and you're always right there on that edge, and I love that about you because I've said this before that, you know, so many of these guys are really good guys when they get to that level, and then they do turn into those prima donnas, and they start believing all the hype and all the jet setting, and they're making millions of dollars, and everybody's telling them they're the greatest thing since sliced bread, that it even if they don't know it, it's self-consciously, it happens.
Right, and Brian Patty, will be so refreshing to go from somebody like Juan Pablo, who I firmly believe, and Brian's really never come out and said this, but you got the impression that Brian put his heart and soul in this. He was waiting for Juan Pablo to do the same. You know, at the end of their relationship, it just wasn't there. Happened. You can't blame it on Brian Patty because they went out and got a new crew chief, and how's that working for them?
Yeah.
How is it working for them after Brian Patty left? So you look at, you know, give them time. Give Clint and Brian Patty time, and you know, Clint's going to be up there in the top 10.
Well, you, as you said, what you see is what you get in Clint, and you could just tell in his body language how excited he is to be with Brian Patty.
Oh, yeah, Brian's a great guy, and Brian is a smart guy. Maybe 3 years ago, right about the time he had that first season with Juan Pablo, he sat there and mathematically showed me, this is what we figured out is where we have to have an average finish so we make the chase, and they made the chase. You know, they weren't able to perform up to that the next year, and they fell out of it. There's no reason why Juan Pablo Montoya shouldn't be, you know, making the chase. We know the caliber of driver he is. Mm-hmm. I think it's really hard to live in Miami and make the commute and not give the investment to the guys that are back at the shop that are pulling down Somewhere between 50 and 75,000 a year, and then you read on Twitter that he's out there windsurfing or he's at TaylorMade checking out the
Detaches
best clubs.
himself from the team.
Yeah,
right.
you don't have that cohesive thing, and until Juan Pablo Montoya fully commits to the 42 team, top 15, top 20, that's going to be what you see is what you get.
Well, any predictions for today's race? Tell me we're not going to have a fuel mileage race, first of all.
You're at Kansas, okay?
Oh, that's
Hello.
right. Hello.
Kansas, Michigan, California.
Long run tracks.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the way it is. Pat Warren, he sounded very optimistic on Saturday when he talked about the fact that putting the variable banking in here would make it a little more like Homestead. So we had so many fuel mileage races last year, and a lot of that was just getting used to the new fuel canisters that they had. Now we're still getting used to fuel injection, and there's next year's going to be the new car.
How bad's it hurt the sport, fuel mileage races like that?
I will say that it does add that air of mystery, because you're never quite sure who's going to be the one that breaks through. Jack Roush, why he's been so successful at Michigan is because they were masters at it. And Michigan was always a few mileage track, and I swear Toyota has to have a bounty on for their drivers to win at that track, because they've really stepped it up there. And I know a lot of Americans hate to see a Toyota winning in Detroit's backyard, but I really, they've done really, really great jobs. But a lot of times with this fuel canister, you don't know exactly what got into the tank, and it's very it's still a little hit or miss.
Yeah, a little witch science going on there a little bit, right? Yeah. So, okay, Lee, any predictions on who's going to win?
Oh, boy. It's hard to discount Biffle, but Kevin Harvick just seems due. We haven't heard a whole lot about RCR this season. And, he looked pretty stout out there. They just have to be able to keep up with the car. He doesn't feel like they're missing anything. He and Shane Wilson get along really, really well together. And Shane, I've had people tell me at RCR he's the best crew chief that they had. So I'm kind of surprised we haven't seen them faster out of the gate.
Yeah.
I say Jeff Gordon, finally luck on his side, and finally gets that 200 for Hendrick. What do you think about that?
Wow. I think Hendrick's the only owner here to have won 4 races, so it's certainly hard to bet against the Hendrick guys. But that visual in the back of my head of Rick loading up those 200-win hats in his trunk every week.
Well, I will tell you that I would like to see Dale Jr. I'm not a big Dale Jr. fan. I'm not a guy that sits there and roots for him every week. But if he could win that 200th race and get his first win at Hendrick, that would put more people back in the stands. I think that is something that we desperately need in our sport. If
you have time to play the audio for your listeners today of the clip from Friday.
He's the best.
When he said, "I believe that I'm the best." And it wasn't arrogant. I think that any race car driver who doesn't tell himself that he's the best, he doesn't need to strap in on Sundays.
No, I agree. Thanks, Lee.
Appreciate you guys having me on.
All right. We'll take a break. We'll be back with more here on Sports Radio 810 WHB.